All right, folks, we're going to call the planning committee meeting to order. Members of the public, we're advising that our meetings are webcast live by the city, archived on our website. Other individuals and media may also audibly and or visually be recording the meeting. Madam Clerk, any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair, there are changes for item 8.1A. There are added written submissions respecting applications for amendments to the Urban Hamilton Official Plan and Hamilton Zoning Bylaw number 05-200 for lands located at 461 Green Road in Stony Creek. And the written submissions are from Allison Cruikshank, Doug and Pat Stanford, Lenore Kumel, Terry Lynn McClelland, Debbie Martin, Judith A. Duncan, Henry Camphius, Frank Jelcevic, Dave and Diane McLean, Colleen Sanders, and Sherry Hayes and Dennis Facia. And the staff presentation for the public meeting has been distributed.
Motion to approve the agenda as amended, moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Partridge. All in favor? Any declarations of interest this morning? Councillor Collins.
I need to declare an interest to prevent a conflict on 10.3 as my spouse is co-author of the report.
And you've completed the declaration of interest form? Okay, motion to approve the minutes as presented. Moved by Collins, seconded by Wilson. All in favor? I seek now a motion to approve the delegation request for the March 24th meeting, and that's moved by Councillor Collins, seconded by Councillor Danko. All in favor? Okay, on to oh, I thought. No problem. And now on to public hearings and delegations. I want to note for public hearings that can be subject to LPAT appeals will require the applicant or agent to come to the podium so that we have a record of their support or objection to the staff report on the video recording of the meeting, as the videos become evidence in our appeal process. And 8.1 is first. This is the application for amendments to our UHOP and Hamilton zoning bylaw. These are lands located at 461 Green Road, Stony Creek, Ward 10. Members of the public, in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act, please be advised that a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Council of the City of Hamilton before Council makes a decision regarding the official plan amendment or zoning bylaw amendment. If that person doesn't come forth, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the Council of the City of Hamilton to the local planning appeal tribunal, and that person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the local planning appeal tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to do so. So we're looking now for any members of the public wishing to address committee here today on item 8.1. Okay, we got one. And you are a resident, sir? Okay, thank you. We'll get to you. So we have a delegation. We're going to first hear the staff presentation, and it is Tim Ruman who will be presenting on behalf of the city. Hey, Tim. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, two items. I need to step out at 10 for a telephone call, and I need to leave if we go that long at 1:30 for a medical appointment with my daughter. Thank you.
I appreciated you let us know that last week on the 1:30. 10 is not a problem. We're doing well with quorum today. Anybody else? Tim, welcome back to your second straight planning meeting presentation.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, staff, and public in attendance. My name is Tim Vroman, Senior Planner with the Development Planning Suburban Team, and I will be discussing the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment applications for the lands located at 461 Green Road in Stony Creek. Oh. There we go. The The proposed development is for a 14-story multiple dwelling with 465 square meters or 5,000 square feet of ground floor commercial space and 260 dwelling units with on-site amenities, visitor and commercial surfing parking spaces, and a ground two-level residential garage for a total of 390 parking spaces. The site is currently developed with a 1,400 square meter or 15,000 square foot one-story commercial plaza. Holding provisions are being applied to ensure that necessary upgrades to the sanitary sewers are completed, a revised traffic impact study is approved, and the acquisition of lands from the Ministry of Transportation necessary for the proposed access to Green Road is secured. These are applied in accordance with the official plan. Holding provisions are needed in cases where completion of site-specific studies, such as the traffic impact study, is required. Consolidation of land ownership of abutting properties, such as the MTO reserve block, and to ensure orderly development where municipal infrastructure is not adequate to support the ultimate development of the site, such as the existing sanitary sewer capacity. I note that the applicant had previously reviewed and signed off on the proposed bylaws. However, they're now requesting that the holding provisions be removed. The official plan amendment proposes to add a site-specific policy to permit a maximum net residential density of 349 units per hectare, where a maximum of 200 units per hectare is currently permitted. And the zoning bylaw amendment proposes to change the zoning from the community commercial C3 zone to a modified mixed-use medium-density C5 zone. Modification is the C5 zone proposed for certain setbacks, building height, parking density, and other provisions. And the proposed zoning is specific to this proposed development and was originally drafted according to the former City of Stony Creek zoning bylaw, which was later changed to a modified mixed-use medium-density C5 zone when the commercial mixed-use zoning came into force in effect, which triggered some other technical variances. These modifications ensure compatibility of the proposed development with surrounding uses and the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw. So as you can see here, the subject lands are located on the northwest corner of Green Road and North Service Road. Street and block townhouses are located abutting the property to the north and west. Vacant properties owned mixed-use commercial, the MUC4 zone modified to the east, and the QEWs to the south, and there are business employment uses on the other side. So this here is the preliminary site plan for the application. These are the colored elevations, and these are the angular plane drawings. As you can see, this one is on the south. This is along North Service Road. This would be through the center of the site when the section from North Service Road, and this is the section, the view from Green Road as well. So this is the current view of the site from the interior. This is looking in from the southeast corner. This is again the same angle looking at the property from across Green Road. This is the northeast corner of the site from across Green Road. And here we're looking at the interface with the townhomes along Francis Avenue at the north rear yard of the site. And this is also looking as well at the interface with the townhomes on Francis Avenue. This is at the west side yard of the site. So the property is just tucked in behind and back there, behind the grouping of trees there. This is a view of the vacant property that's to the east across Green Road. And this is looking again to the east. There's the development that's can be seen in the back that's along Francis Avenue. This is the view to the south along Green Road. I would also note that the traffic signals there have been recently installed at the intersection of Green Road and North Service Road. And this is just looking towards the east along North Service Road and then west along North Service Road. And then lastly, this is the view north along Green Road. As for the surrounding built form, this is an example of the street townhouses on the south side of Francis Avenue. So this is immediately north of the subject property. And then these are the block townhouses along Francis Avenue that are just to the west side of the subject site. And again, this is just looking to the north across Francis Avenue. You can see the townhouses as well as the multiple dwellings on the north side. And this is another view of the multiple dwellings that are north of Francis Avenue. So and these are some conceptual 3D massing models that have been prepared. It's just a conceptual block massing of the development. The actual building is certainly has more articulation in the design with color and variety of form to minimize the blank walls. That is, block massing's been inputted into GoCo Earth, so we have a few of those views prepared. So this is looking at it from the southeast corner, as well as viewing it from the east. So the application was sent to 346 property owners with 120 meters of the subject property. 16 letters and emails were received, with 1 in support and 15 expressing concern, including 2 separate resident petitions, a total of 176 signatories, and additional comments were also received at the community meeting that was held in January 2019. The comments that were received can be briefly summarized as follows. Residents are concerned that the 14-story high-rise multiple dwelling will be out of character with the area and that it is too much density for this neighborhood that is essentially cut off from the rest of Stony Creek by the Queen Elizabeth Way. The area contains a mixture of low, medium, and high-density developments, including those 2 existing 18-story multiple dwellings. And the subject property is situated on the periphery of the neighborhood with access to a minor arterial road, designated so that's North Service Road. And it is close to regional transit services at the Confederation GO station, which makes it appropriate for residential intensification. The opinion of staff based on this that the proposed development would not be out of character with the existing context, and as well residential intensification will also strengthen the viability of improved transit service in the area. Residents are also concerned that the height of the building will reduce sunlight and privacy in the backyards and windows to the abutting townhouses. Residents are also concerned that outdoor lighting and lights from inside each of the proposed units will shine on the property, and noise or fumes will emanate from the parkade vents. As discussed above, the proposed development is sited as far as possible from the property lines abutting the residential lands and applies a 45-degree angular plane using a step-back design on the north and west elevations, which is a best practice for considering adjacent developments regarding overlook. And also based on the approved shadow study, the proposed massing will not cast significant shadows on adjacent properties, and the building is oriented on a north-south axis to minimize the cast shadows. And lastly, the detailed noise study, site lighting plan, and detailed building design will be required at a future site plan control stage, and screening and other design features will be reviewed at that time to address any light paths, noise, or other emissions impacting adjacent residential properties. Residents also said early in the process that the community needs commercial amenities, as the next nearest commercial uses are across the QEW. The original application was for a standalone multiple dwelling. Revisions to the proposed development now include the commercial space on the ground floor to cater to the needs of the surrounding neighborhood. As well, the residential intensification will help sustain the local commercial uses for the area. Public comments also suggested the green space should be larger with the size of the building, and not only on North Service Road, but also along Green Road and Francis Avenue. They're concerned that trees that are planted on adjacent properties may be cut or damaged during construction. We note that the site is privately owned, is not designated as a public park or open space, and that landscaped amenity areas provided within the development are intended for private use. Of course, a detailed landscape plan, including plantings along the required planting strips, and the property lines adjoining the adjacent residential uses will be required at the site plan control stage. And also the approved tree protection plan says that all the existing trees that will remain on site or for those on adjacent properties will be tagged and fully protected with fencing and notice signs advising of the tree protection zones per the standard practice. One of the other main concerns is with respect to traffic. That the proposed development will cause an increase to traffic in the area and at the intersection of Green Road and North Service Road. Congestion on the QEW causes additional traffic to detour on the service road, which adds to the existing traffic congestion. We note that the traffic impact study concludes that the development can be supported from traffic operations perspective. As highlighted previously, the traffic signals have just been installed at the intersection of North Service Road and Green Road to alleviate increasing background traffic. Any other road improvements as well as the emergency detour routes with respect to the Queen Elizabeth Way would be beyond the scope of this particular development application. And also, as previously stated, a holding provision is being applied for required revisions to the traffic impact study to address some inconsistencies. However, these do not question the available capacity of the transportation network. Concerns have also been raised regarding parking. Concerned that it may be insufficient to accommodate second vehicles and visitors who would have to park on the street. The revisions made to the proposed design, the proponent has proposed 1.5 parking spaces per dwelling unit, which is inclusive of visitor parking, which is an increase from the original proposal of 1.25 spaces per unit, which is more than, this is more than the minimum residential parking spaces required by the existing zoning bylaw. Also, a parking justification study has been submitted and reviewed, which concludes the proposed parking rate is acceptable. And that's, kind of the high-level overview of that. Based on this information, staff's opinion, the proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendment has merit and can be supported as it is consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms to a place to grow, and complies with the general intent of the policies of the Urban Hamilton official plan. In particular, the proposed development complements the existing function of the neighborhood, contributes to a complete community by maintaining the existing local commercial uses, and provides residential intensification in an appropriate and strategic location in the neighborhood's destination. Intensification ensures land, municipal services, and transportation systems are used efficiently and sufficient population is maintained to support community facilities, including regional transit, which builds on the strength of communities to create and maintain vibrant neighborhoods and provide a wide range of housing types. Given its proximity to employment areas and regional transit, the proposal is compatible with and complementary to the surrounding area in terms of use, scale, form, and character. This concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Tim. Councillor Pearson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. And thank you, Tim, for the presentation. I may ask questions to what you've already raised, but I just want to make sure for the viewing public and residents here. Mixed use C5 zone, can you give us a sort of an idea of what will be allowed in there? And I'm assuming it's only the first floor that's going to be allowed in. Is that correct? Through you, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, so the proposal is for commercial uses on the first floor, although the zoning doesn't preclude that it may have other uses on other levels.
Okay.
So typically we permit a range of retail, personal service, office types of uses, as well as residential above.
Super, thank you for that. And you mentioned the parking, that they are surpassing the required parking spaces. Could you just highlight that again? As you said, you went through it really fast. 1.4 is our requirement, and they're providing how many? And I notice of 260 units, I'm showing 390, am I correct, parking spaces?
Yes, they are proposing a total of, there's 390 parking spaces. And I believe that the zoning bylaw would require somewhere in the range of 200, 260. So it's 1.25 spaces per unit, which would be the requirement under the current zoning bylaw 05200.
And they're providing what? So 1.25 is the required, they're providing?
1.5.
1.5, thank you. And let me see, you mentioned about the signalization. Yes, that has been activated as of last week. Thrilled to see that. And can I just get the shadowing issue? There will be, and I'm sure the applicant's agent will have more information as far as the effects on the shadowing of the properties to the west, most importantly. So I'll leave that for the applicant's agent at that time. The lighting question, and certainly I've had this come up on other developments recently where they put the lighting in the eaves and now it affects, it's not that it's spilling over, but you do have lighting. So can you just explain what our requirements are with regards to exterior lighting on units?
Thank you. So through the chair, the details of lighting would be addressed at the site plan control stage. Through our site plan guidelines, it has standards for site lighting, ensures that full cutoff fixtures lighting doesn't spill over onto adjacent properties, and measured in units that are referred to as foot candles.
Right.
So the photometrics plan will be prepared as part of the site plan application submission through that review.
Thank you. And lastly, I'm not sure if you touched on, there's a holding zone being required for servicing upgrades. Are we aware of where that stands at this point?
Well, I understand that the requirement is for the sanitary sewer capacity. From my understanding, it is the capacity for the lines that would go basically under the QEW and connect to the sanitary sewer trunk in Barton Street. Any further details, I would certainly
I may ask Tony. Super.
Sergi.
And with that, thank you for that then, Mr. Chairman. If I could ask Mr. Sergi, Mr. Sergi, with regards to the sanitary sewer capacity, I know we have issues easterly of this property, but can you just clarify, I'm assuming then we're concerned that there is not capacity here? And would services to provide the increased capacity required here have to go under the QEW at Green Road? Or is this one that will also hook up to the Millen Road?
Through the chair to the councillor, both options are on the table at this point in time. We haven't gone through a detailed analysis, and my understanding as of late, there was a third option that came forward as they're being creative to look at solutions. So they're both tied to the same capacity constraint, along with the balance of the lands that are on east of Millen.
Right. East side of Green. Thank you, Mr. Sergi. I appreciate that. That's all my comments or questions right now, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Thank you, Tim.
Councillor Danko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two questions, Tim. So mixed-use density C5 is commercial main floor, residential above. On the density and the height of the building, my understanding that C5 zoning was 2 to 6 stories. Is that accurate?
Through the chair, yes, the parent C5 zone is 22 meters, which, yes, can be about 6 stories.
That could be extended up to 8 if there's no shadow impacts. That was my understanding of C5. Is that accurate?
I believe through the official plan policies, I believe that it's 6 stories is kind of the cap, and he
Right.
would need further review through planning applications such as minor variance or rezoning for any taller.
So my question then is, with this particular development, with the same C5 mixed-use zoning, how do we end up at 14?
So so the proposed application, it was originally designed through the former City of Stony Creek zoning. Our own zoning bylaws evolved and they incorporated the commercial component, it kind of looking for what zone would be the most appropriate and the best fit. Zoning is certainly structured to accommodate the proposed development, and the amendments are specific to the design as well as ensuring that it's compatible with adjacent developments, but there wasn't a one-size-fits-all type of zone that would fit necessarily, so, sorry.
I'm going to ask you, this is a former broadcaster, slow it down a little bit right into the mic and enunciate. Because I'm struggling a little bit too. I'm catching it, but not all of it. It's for the viewers as well, for the most part.
Absolutely.
Just at the end, you tend to trail off. So give it one more time and answer to that question, please.
Okay, so, yeah, I guess, once again, the C5 zone is, the proposed development was originally structured to the City of Stony Creek, the former zoning bylaw for the community, and as the zoning evolved with the adoption of the commercial mixed-use zoning that came into effect a little over a year ago, as well as the proposed development incorporated the commercial component, they applied the C5 zone as what was best fitting for the proposed development. However, there isn't a specific zone that it was the best fit, essentially. The zoning amendments would consider how the proposed development is ensuring that it's compatible with the surrounding development, and ensuring with the respect to the 45-degree angular plane, as well as meeting the general intent purposes on bylaw and the official plan for residential intensification and the density targets for the neighborhoods.
And then on the density target for the neighborhood, so the UHOP permits a maximum density of 200 units per hectare. What's being proposed is 349. So again, the height and the density here seem to be connected. So if we did stick to that 6 to 8 story C5 zoning, we would be pretty close to what the UHOP density would be. So the justification for the increased density as well?
Through the chair, as the proposed density, it's an increase to the neighborhoods range of 100 to 200 for high density development. The justification for this particular amendment is the intensification targets do direct intensification of 40% towards the neighborhood's designation, as well as increased density may be acceptable in appropriate locations. Based on this one, it's located on our a minor arterial road within our service road, as well as it being in proximity to Confederation GO Station. It would be supportive as intensifying surrounding regional transit services. It would help to support the growth of the area, to support its own local transit service viability and maintain the commercial use for the community, as well as a transition of density that's for this particular neighborhood.
Thank you, Tim. And just for committee's benefit, the reason I'm asking is we have a lot of C5 zoning on Upper James, and just when there's a similar zoning for a different location that is quite a bit different than what I'm envisioning for C5 zoning on Upper James and other areas in Ward 8, it definitely raises some red flags. But thank you for your answers, Tim.
And thank you, Tim. Appreciate it. You got 3 more councillors asking questions. Councillor Brenda Johnson is next.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and my apologies for being late. I was on a conference call. So, Tim, can you please go back to, hang on, I can't hear you. 1, 2, maybe the third in, it's an overview of the area. It's a satellite view.
Okay.
Right there. Can you please let us know where the triplets are going?
So the site plan application for what is referred to as the triplets, the proposed development on Francis, so that's the vacant property just immediately to the east.
So for those that don't know what the triplets are, this is your 59-story, your 49-story, and your 39-story that's being proposed for that area. When this application came forward, was the entire area taken into consideration as far as density and height, availability to schools and transit and parks? Was any of that taken into consideration?
Through the chair, so with referring to the MUC4 zone, it does permit a limited variety of commercial use as well. It is zoned to permit high-density apartment dwellings, and with respect to that, the site plan application has been received, but certainly that's not sort of this application. But as for the surrounding neighborhood amenities, the circulation was sent to school boards as well as our recreation department. There was no comment that were received from schools. Our recreation did comment that while there is some deficiency, there are some park sites, and that the proposed development of incorporating on-site amenities into the building, it will address any of those issues.
So
They had no
because
concerns
they're
beyond that.
providing green space on that particular property, that excludes the need for parkland, correct? For the people that are moving into this building.
Through the chair, wouldn't necessarily say that it excludes the need. They would certainly, through the development, would be providing cash in lieu of parkland dedication. And as well, yeah, but yes, these, they would have amenities on site for the residents to use. That would be internal to the building through certain.
Okay, Tim, I still can't hear you.
Sorry, through
Sorry,
certain
you're
group,
saying some really important stuff and I don't want to miss it.
through certain community rooms that they would have, or like group rooms, like media rooms, a gym, those sorts of facilities interior, as well as outdoor terraces and the yards as well on the ground floor.
So just to be clear, and I heard you answer Councillor Danko's question, theoretically, the C5 zone allows for 8 stories max. That's if they can prove the 8-story doesn't overshadow, and that the density would be well under 349 per acre, correct?
Through the chair, that's correct.
So why is it then, given that the triplets are coming, this is appropriate for this area that literally backs onto townhomes? 14 stories, 348 units.
Through the chair, as previously said, so the subject site is along an arterial, and it's in close proximity to regional transit, so it's an area that would be appropriate for residential intensification. And But I think with the compatibility with the adjacent properties, we can. So this is an example of that, what I refer to as the 45-degree angular plane. So this is what's used as a measure of appropriate development. So as you can see, the angled line there, that is the line. The building doesn't project above that, which is considered it's the best practice approach for compatibility and transition between adjacent uses.
And my last question, Mr. Chair, is, so when we say close proximity to, say, the GO station, we don't take into consideration it takes people a car to get there because there's no transit available for them to get to that GO station, correct? We don't take that into consideration?
And through the chair, that is correct. There is, beyond what is available right now, there's the Transcab service, but we would note that as density would increase, it would increase the viability of providing more regular and frequent transit service to the neighborhood.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm wondering if I can ask staff on the front bench questions also. So on page 30 of 40 in the report that was prepared by Tim, we're dealing with traffic and parking. So I guess Mr. Hollingsworth would be the person I'd be asking the questions to, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir. So it says, and I'm quoting, proposed development will cause an increase to already heavy traffic congestion in the area at the intersection of Green and North Service Road resulting from other new developments. Congestion on QEW causes additional traffic to detour onto service roads, adding to the existing heavy traffic congestion. And the response seems to be that there was a traffic impact study by Crozier Consulting concluding that the development can support the traffic operations within the boundary roads that are there. Do we agree with that?
Through the chair, we've spent quite a bit of time on this application. There's been 3 iterations of the traffic impact studies. We still haven't signed off on the latest traffic impact study. In addition to some methodological concerns, we wanted to be sure that we were making the right conclusions on traffic. This development generates about 116 trips, two-way trips in the PM, so it's not massive. It doesn't, it doesn't put Green Road and North Service Road into a significantly overcapacity situation. So our approach now is just making sure the site plan works and mitigating any further traffic impacts.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask Tim to put the picture up of the, I guess it was an aerial.
Page 3.
There we go. Thank you very much. So, through you, Mr. Chairman, I understand we look at these applications based on the application that is before us, but we know that they don't work just as one application in complete isolation from all of the other development in the area. So I'm looking now at it more holistically. The volume of the traffic that's being proposed, this is the area with the 3 giant towers. And so I'm trying to understand comprehensively the transportation study that has been done to indicate what needs to be done to the roads to handle such an increase in volume in the near future. So I'm looking at the North Service Road, all of the arterials, access points, egresses in and out of the property. Are the roads wide enough? All of that. And when I'm looking at this study, I'm trying to understand, and I don't mean to belabor it, how do we get to the point where we know we've got all this development coming and we've done proper comprehensive traffic and transportation studies to ensure that the infrastructure is there to handle all of that traffic that is coming, not just this one site.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the traffic impact study conducted for this site did take into account what we call background traffic. So there's 6 or 7 developments which fed into the background traffic conditions. I would note that it doesn't include 310 Francis as background traffic, which is significant. but it did account for growth, and it did look at the incremental impacts of this development on top of what's planned to take place in the area.
So in the study on page 31 of 40, it indicates that the North Service Road needs resurfacing, lower speed limits, proper and safe turning lanes, widening, improved lighting, and traffic signals. So who is paying for all of that?
I'll take a first crack, and then I'll look to Tony, whose group develops the external works agreements. But generally, things like resurfacing, we don't pin on a particular development. Turning lanes, if it is triggered by a particular development, we do look for those types of improvements to be paid for. In this case, the signal went in, and I believe that was paid for by the city. Tony will correct me if it's through development charges or not, but it is a combination.
Through the chair to the councillor, the road improvements along the service road were split 50-50 from a previous approvals that were completed for the developments that came through 10 years ago on Francis Avenue. So there was a cost sharing direct developer contribution related to the triggers and dealing with some of the existing background traffic.
And so is that 10-year agreement still in play for all of the new development that's coming? If there's going to be a widening of the road, that's a tremendous cost.
Through the chair to the councillor, the works that were triggered by the development at the time were secured and paid for. Any future works as they trigger based on increase, we'll have to look at the implications. I don't recall seeing the service road being on the background study as it relates to increased lane capacity.
And so how do we address that issue comprehensively? I know it's not my ward, and I apologize for asking, but I'm looking at a rather large exponential growth in residents, which means more cars, in an area where we're getting highlights saying that we don't have the width in the arterial roads to handle it. So how are we going to handle that going forward? And will there be a comprehensive transportation infrastructure study done to ensure that we're capturing what needs to be done for all of these developments?
Through the chair to the councillor, that's a very good question. Very good question.
I try to ask them,
very,
yes.
very good question. As it relates to looking at it from 50,000 square feet or 50,000 feet, we've already done that on the infrastructure side of it. When we look at our background studies, we look at what the increases could be based on potential land use, et cetera, et cetera. For this specific area on the sanitary specifically, we did look at that, and that's where Councillor Pearson's question was going with as it relates to potential solutions and who's paying for what as to the contributing costs associated with these improvements. So some discussions have been going on with the people that are triggering these. So it's best that we get always into a landowners group and have very prescriptive as to who's paying for what. So we know what the options are and the solutions. As it relates to the traffic impacts, I don't remember seeing any proposed additional lane improvements that were being triggered far and except for the direct turning lanes going in and out of specific properties. Over and above that, I don't remember adding additional lanes or center turning lanes over and above what was already installed on the service road. I believe we have turning lanes that were put in at both Green and Millen in the past to deal with these signalizations in the future.
So were the widenings or any of that captured in the background studies for the DCs?
No, to build on what Tony said through the chair, I don't believe North Service Road is tagged in either the citywide transportation master plan or the background DCs for a full-on widening beyond its existing, other than turn lanes.
So I'm just flagging it. I'm looking at the exponential growth in the area. I'm looking at the transportation that is currently there. I know from experience in Upper Stony Creek the challenges that exponential growth can have to transportation infrastructure if we have not prepared for it and if we have not done the comprehensive study. That's why we're doing the comprehensive study in Upper Stony Creek for all of the urban boundary expansion that's being proposed. I'm just concerned that we're looking at them piecemeal, but holistically, Mr. Chairman, I'm a little bit concerned about the total volume of traffic that will be coming out onto those roads, and can those roads actually handle it? And I'll leave it to the ward councillor to sort it out with you, but I'm just flagging it as a potential challenge down the road, and we certainly don't want the taxpayers to be paying for additional infrastructure, which was caused by all of the developers requesting these developments be approved, in my opinion. Thank you.
Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just have a couple of questions related to the history of the site in the area, and so whether it's Tim or someone else who chooses to answer, I'm looking at page 15 of 40, which describes a little bit of the history related to the area. And, you know, I'm looking across the street where there's, as was mentioned, there's the proposal for 3 buildings there of significant size. And then, of course, there's 2 buildings that were already constructed. They're 18 stories, and they were constructed in the 1970s. And so there's a history or a legacy zoning that's remnant from Stony Creek days, where substantial height seems to be accepted and encouraged. And I don't think, you know, based on the history between what happened in the 70s right up until maybe 5 or 10 years ago, I'm not certain that there was market demand to build something of great height, but of course times have changed, and that's a good thing in many respects. So I'm looking at the precedent in the area in terms of the 2 buildings that were constructed in the 70s. I'm looking at the legacy zoning across the street, and I'm curious to know how we landed on in transitioning from the Stony Creek to modern zoning, how we transitioned to the C3 zoning. Can I get an understanding in terms of how that occurred and the rationale for that, and why maybe it wasn't something different than that? And when I say different, I mean to a higher density.
Who would like to look at the history of the area? Tim, you got an idea?
Yeah, through the chair, yeah, I can start on the history of the subject site. So through the commercial mixed use zoning initiative, the previous zoning was this general commercial zone for Stony Creek, which permitted neighborhood plazas, such as what is currently existing in the C3 zone, and the 05200 zoning bylaw is the neighborhood commercial. It's generally the same built form and uses. So that was to reflect the existing use of the property. It wasn't to be speculative of what may be redeveloped in the future at the time with that rezoning. As for the neighborhood area, the site across the street, as recently stated, it has zoning that does permit. It has a minimum density allowance that allows for a high density development, as well. It doesn't have a building height cap. The zoning and the anticipation for this neighborhood, the area generally, was originally envisioned with a subdivision that was from at the beginning, back several decades ago, was for development similar to the 2 18-story towers that exist presently.
Okay. All right, that's my other question.
Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just for clarification, and I appreciate Councillor Clark's questions. So the North Service Road, and we can just reiterate, with regards to the North Service Road, signalization has been installed. So staff have been working on this for quite some time, with myself as well, in trying to address the ongoing issues with regards to traffic and traffic flow. So I know that on page 31 of 40, as Councillor Clark raised, it mentions traffic speeds, and that has already been lowered. That was lowered before summer 2018. It should be 60 through that stretch. So that has been done. The signalization has gone in at green and was activated last week, and signalization is proposed. I'm not sure if Mr. Hollingsworth wants to comment, but signalization will be going forward this year at Drake's as well, and this is in conjunction with the Confederation Park sports area expansion. Through you, Mr. Chairman, if Brian maybe can just clarify.
Brian?
Yes, that's correct. I don't have an update on timing of that.
But it is scheduled to move forward.
So yes.
And further east at Millen, you don't see it on this plan, but further east at Millen, where Seasons Retirement has been built, pedestrian access signals are also proposed in that area, and Mr. Hollingsworth may be able to comment on that as well, because they are scheduled. They should have gone in last fall. And maybe through you, Mr. Chairman.
Again, correct.
Thank you. And I think lastly, the center turn lanes, and Mr. Sergi did mention about funding. So center turn lanes were incorporated at this intersection. So there is a center turn lane. And I think what is being, we're waiting for the weather is the line markings to be redone so that they are more visible. And certainly whatever signage indicating, you know, that they're coming up and there's a center turn lane, et cetera. Because those are the issues that the neighborhood has expressed. So I just want to be sure that was clarified. I won't go into the history of the area. I think most councillors are aware as far as the number of applications that have come forward in this particular area and the history of going back to the 70s where it was proposed for 13 high-rise towers in this particular area. And through the downturn, I take it in the 70s when the first 2 towers were built. Technically, I've been told that the Shoreliner was actually 2 buildings, and they connected it, made it 1. You don't see it in this picture. But that's basically the history of this particular area. So it is on the books as far as densification, and we're doing everything we can as far as traffic to mitigate the traffic concerns that are certainly front and center with residents. Thank you.
And moving to receive Tim's presentation, Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Clark. Good job, Tim. Thank you very much. And I'm looking to John Aarons now of IBI to come on down to the podium, indicating whether you are in support or not of the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of committee, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Arians. I'm a planner with the IBI Group. With me in the gallery is Gabe DeSantis, president of Homes by DeSantis. You may recall I was before committee a couple weeks ago on his Como project at Fruitland Road. The last unit has just sold in Como. This is in fact going to be their next project, just a couple blocks west on the QEW. Their marketing efforts to date have generated a list of over 7,000 people that are interested in this particular building. And we're very confident that with your zoning approvals, we'll secure site plan approval and provide additional accommodations in this very desirable area of the former city of Stoney Creek. I do have some history. Councillor Pearson and Councillor Clark may recall I used to work for the city of Stoney Creek way back when. The development was known as Confederation Beach Estates, and I'll use the cursor rather than the pointer if I can. Where is the cursor? Here we go. So this is the subject property, which has a tired 25-year-old plaza on it. The lands immediately behind the plaza where these townhouses are were in fact 2 blocks for high density, 22-story towers connected by a community center in the middle. The lands across the street were similar, 2 blocks, 22-story buildings connected with a community center in the middle. Both of those were acquired by Homes by DeSantis and downzoned, and the townhouses were built. On the east side of Green Road, Councillor Pearson is correct. We have the Bayliner and the Shoreliner. These were 2 buildings originally that were joined into 1. And in fact, all of the lands to the east were intended for 20 and 22-story apartment towers. That was downzoned by LiUNA approximately 5 years ago, save and except the height and density for where the triplets are proposed by a joint venture of New Horizon Homes and LiUNA. I can point out that Green Road was intended to accommodate higher density traffic. That's how the road was built. That's how it was designed. You'll see on my site plan that it's like a runway. It's such a wide stretch of road. Through the efforts of Councillor Pearson, the traffic light is now operational on the service road, thereby making that a very safe intersection. The C3 zoning for the plaza reflects the historical use. It didn't reflect the intended long-term use for redevelopment. It was simply an existing plaza that was built approximately 25 years ago. Why a 14-story tower at this point in time? Well, certainly the market is there today. We're in a very desirable lakefront community. We have walking trails, we have the waterfront trail, we have Lakewood Park in this location over here, or Edge Lake Park, 2 former school sites which contribute to the open space. We have active playgrounds and play structures and tennis and facilities here. And as I indicated, we've got the bike trails along the QEW North Service Road. So this is a very desirable neighborhood. It's also desirable because of its proximity to the GO station. And yes, for the time being, people will have to drive or ride their bikes or take Uber. I know Mr. Pakin for the triplets is looking at having his own shuttle bus service to the GO station. Homes by DeSantis is in discussions with New Horizon, and we hope to take advantage of that as well. You've heard the expression, build it and they will come, or whatever that expression is. Transit never comes before the development. Transit always follows. So having the higher density here will contribute for additional transit in this neighborhood. These are some photographs of the old and tired plaza that exists on the property. And we're going to talk about the loss of commercial and how commercial is actually still going to be carried forward in this development. This is the site plan of the property, and as I indicated, the green road allowance is substantial. As I said, it's like an airport runway. We've moved the driveway to the development as far north as possible to create appropriate stacking at that intersection. As that intersection gets busier, there's no conflicts with the driveway location. You'll also see on this slide that we've tucked the building into the southeast corner of the development, as far away from the townhouses to the west and as far away from the townhouses to the north as we could, in order to enhance compatibility. The site plan also includes a road widening and a daylight triangle along the North Service Road. There's zoning modifications, and I'll get to those in a minute, that talks about some vents. This is the location of one of the vents. The other one is to the north, and they're simply there to get air into the underground. There's no noise, there's no dust, there's no emissions whatsoever from those vents. Also on the site plan, you'll see in this location in the southwest corner, there's actually remnants of a berm and a noise fence, because the townhouses built by DeSantis were actually built before the commercial plaza, and we had to wrap a noise wall along this side of the building. That will remain in place. This is the architect's rendering of a very exciting, new, modern, welcome to Stony Creek lakefront building. And what's really important of this plan is you see the step backs, like the wedding cake as it gets closer to the top. The building has been purposefully stepped back to enhance privacy. So when you're on the balconies on the 5th floor or the 6th floor, you're not looking directly down on your neighbors. Your views are to the west, they're to the horizon. And similarly, this is the north elevation. When you're on the upper balconies, your views are across to the lake, not looking down on your neighbors. So we're using urban design to enhance compatibility with this building. Along both interfaces with the 2-story townhouses, we only propose a 4-story component of this building. The current designation is neighborhoods with a 200-unit cap, and the current zoning is community commercial C3. Our request is to retain the neighborhoods designation, but to bump up the density so as to take advantage of this site's location on the periphery of the neighborhood. As Mr. Vrooman indicated, the C5 is the best fit, but it needs some modifications to accommodate the development. Now, again, through the efforts of the ward councillor, we did host a neighborhood information meeting, plus we've reviewed all the comments from that were submitted by the residents. And I've lumped the concerns into 3 main categories, the first one being traffic, which would include parking, the second being density, height, and compatibility, and the third being the loss of commercial. As Mr. Hollingworth indicated, there have been several versions of the traffic study. We continue to liaise and work with his department to fine-tune that study. The study basically looked at the existing conditions And of course, it's like a report card, A, B, and C, with A being the best, F being a complete failure of an intersection. And you'll see that the existing level of service for Green and Service Road is level C. Again, through the efforts of the ward councillor with the traffic light and the reduced speeds, when we add the existing and the background, we have a level of service of B. And then when we add the development, the level has a slight increase back up to C, which is still very good with appropriate gaps in the traffic. Now, there was a concern expressed by neighboring residents, well, what if there is a problem with the intersection at Green Road and the service? All of this traffic is now going to come down Green Road, and then it's going to swing westerly along Francis, and we're going to have high-density traffic going through a low-density neighborhood. I'm going to suggest to you that the solution to that problem, should it happen, is totally within your municipal hands to control. When we consider where I've got the cursor now as the end point for the higher density, a simple traffic calming feature here, or even a road closure here in this location, would prevent that through traffic from migrating westerly through the low-density neighborhood. By monitoring the traffic flows in this area, I know we've got a very proactive ward councillor, this municipality can deal with traffic shortcutting through a neighborhood. It's a simple fix. I was once the president of a neighborhood association in the city of Waterloo, where we had horse and buggy streets on the edge of a downtown neighborhood, and because it was on the edge of downtown, taxis, percolators, courier service, delivery vehicles, employees were shortcutting through a residential neighborhood. The easy fix was not four-way stops, not changing one-way or adding one-way streets, but a simple road closure. That solved the problem, and in fact, the city of Waterloo made that permanent in different neighborhoods abutting their downtown core. So there is a solution available should there be a shortcutting problem. With respect to density, height, and compatibility, Mr. Vrooman correctly pointed out that we do have a transition. We're going from west to east, and to the west we have the two-story townhouses. Then we start with this project with 4 stories, 5, 6, 12, 14, and then we have the triplets across the street. So we do have that proper transitioning of height, both from step backs and from the building orientation. The step backs minimize privacy and overlook concerns, and there is no adverse shadow impact, which I'll get to in a moment. And again, no traffic impact, because you have the ability to control the traffic. These are the different slices of the wedding cake, if I can refer to them that way. The different colors represent the different floors at the different cross-sections through the building. The bottom one is from the north, going in a southerly direction, and the other 3 are from west to east. And you can see how that building steps back. And then, of course, our planning tool that we all use is the angular plane analysis. And the zoning bylaw that's before you today actually incorporates the angular plane. For every meter above 11, the side yard setback has to be increased by 1 meter as well. So we've incorporated the angular plane right into your zoning bylaw to make sure that this is what gets built. These are some slides of the shadow studies taken at different times of the year. This is the March study. The upper left-hand corner is the early morning. The lower left-hand corner is at noon. And then the upper one on the right is at 2 o'clock. This is during the summer. The shadows are entirely contained on this property. And it's only in March, the worst time of the year, February, March, where we have a trickle of a shadow early in the morning, later in the morning, and in the middle of the afternoon. By 3 o'clock, that shadow has completely left the abutting properties. So when the residents are enjoying their backyards, there are no shadow issues, no shadow concerns. A lot of the comments talk about the loss of commercial and what are we going to do in this neighborhood. And I'm going to suggest to the committee that commercial viability has always been a concern for the lands north of the Queen Elizabeth Highway. It is an isolated neighborhood, and the best justification I can ask you, how many Tim Hortons are there north of the Queen Elizabeth Highway? Zero, exactly. Where are they? They're on Barton Street, they're on Queenston, they're on every other arterial road, but they're not in north of the QEW because it's such an isolated, limited market. In fact, Mr. DeSantis has had to use a lot of the commercial space himself. He's put his decor center in, he's put his sales center within the building because he just can't attract tenants. There was a concern about the loss of the dentist. Well, the dentist chose to relocate herself prior to her lease expiring. She went to a different market because that's where the population is. But we know that the population is going to grow, and that's why we're proposing a mixed-use building. We will maintain ground floor commercial, and hopefully the existing variety store will be able to relocate within the new building. And as well, Mr. Pakin's project to the east also proposes commercial. So the area will still have commercial development. Members of committee, I know you don't like zoning modifications. I've heard that many times. As Mr. Vrooman indicated, this project was, however, designed to a different zoning standard. We applied when the Stony Creek bylaw was still in effect, and now we have to readjust it to accommodate the C5, the mixed-use zone. And that, like a simple modification, like the parking stalls got bigger under the new bylaw, that has a major redesign impact because the whole underground parking garage was designed for the slightly smaller spaces. All of the columns, all of the load-bearing walls, everything was designed to accommodate it. And that's why you're being asked to make some modifications. And most of the modifications are technical. None whatsoever alter the setbacks from the side lot lines. Some of the modifications recognize which is the front and the side lot lines. Some recognize existing utilities, the bell and the transformer. There's a minor reduction to a planting strip. There are a modification to allow 8 extra parking spots in the MTO district, their control district. I mentioned recognizing the Stony Creek parking size and to allow 2 vents in a parking area, plus reducing a landscape strip because there's these 2 vents in place. A modification would allow loading next to a residential zone. Well, we have no opportunity to put the loading elsewhere. We can't put it in our front yard. We can't put it in our yards abutting Green Road. It would be unsightly. So with buffering and landscaping, it's appropriate where it is. One modification recognizes the greater number of parking spots. In the past, I've referred to these as bylaw exceedances. So we're building into extra parking. We're building in the MTO setback. We're recognizing a slightly reduced setback along Green Road because of the irregular shape of the property. And to make sure that there is ground floor commercial, there's a modification requiring ground floor commercial. Plus, typically apartment buildings have the ground floor elevated. This one, because of the ground floor commercial, the ground floor has to be at grade so people aren't walking up steps to get into a store. Other modifications recognize the maximum size for the outdoor amenity areas, and that's simply so that we don't have to enclose them with noise protection. There are 2 key modifications before you, and I hope you only concentrate on those. One recognizes the height, and the other one is the density and the number of units. Those really are the only 2 specific modifications in play. Now, there is a holding zone proposed. I appreciate the fact that we signed off on the bylaw. However, Mr. DeSantis has to secure financing for the project. And we just discovered that a holding zone does not seem to be very favored by his bank in order to kickstart the project. Typically, a traffic study, sewer upgrades, and removing an MTO 1-foot reserve can be handled at the site plan and are typically not required for H's. In this instance, we are prepared to accept the H, Mr. Chair, members of committee, but hope that we can work with planning staff between now and the council meeting in an effort to try and fine-tune this, and perhaps the bylaw that comes to council may have one of these H requirements removed. Again, it's simply to facilitate the financing of the project. Other than that, those are my comments. I thank you for your time, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
For my own clarity, and we'll go to Councillor Collins in just a second, just in conclusion there, John, you said hopefully, but between now and the end of council, you'll have one removed, or
Well,
which one? You mentioned 3 holding provisions.
well, there are 3 if staff are satisfied that we can deal with the 1-foot reserve when we get our MTO land use permit. If Mr. Hollingworth's team has now reviewed the traffic study and they're happy with it, if Mr. Sergi's team has removed or has reviewed the sanitary, and you know, I'm just a dumb planner, but when these lands were zoned for high-density development, the sewer pipes were put in, everything was downzoned, and now we're trying to get some of that density back, and I don't understand why the pipes aren't working, but again, I defer to our experts.
I got you. Okay, just wanted my own clarity. And for all paying attention, there is one Tim Hortons north of the North Service Road, but that's way over in, I think it's Vineland, Grimsby. Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and through you to John. John, you know, I asked earlier about the history of this area because I think it's relevant and important
I
to
agree.
the application. You know, traditionally, if this was a greenfield property and there's a change such as the one you're presenting here, I think that's problematic. There was a plan for this by the former city of Stony Creek, and I think that history lesson in terms of this area was originally intended to have many, many more high-density or medium-density apartment buildings in it. And over the years, those properties, as you've referenced, have been downzoned to facilitate less people, but the infrastructure, and this is my question, the infrastructure is still there above and below ground with some upgrades needed to accommodate higher densities, just to be clear. Can I confirm that through you in terms of, through those downzoning applications, was there a watering down of the infrastructure requirements, whether they were above ground or below ground?
So through the chair, my understanding is that the main sewer connections from Green Road to the South Service Road were designed and built for Confederation Beach Estates.
Okay, thanks for that. And how many buildings, such as the one that you have in front of us, were originally planned for the area?
Through the chair, I think about 18 to 20 buildings altogether.
Right, so if the original plan from the city of Stony Creek had come to fruition, what kind of densities would we be looking at in terms of traffic and people compared to what the plan has today, and knowing that we still have 3 buildings that will be constructed across the street? Are we looking at a third of the densities that were originally proposed, a quarter, a half? Do you have a best guess in that regard?
So based on my memory, I think the density would have been 3 times greater than what exists today, sir.
Okay. And again, Mr. Chairman, I think those are important points, and I'll save some of my comments obviously for later, but when people move in then to these modified and revised plans and units and built form structures, they move in not knowing what the history is related to the site, and then obviously it comes as a shock to everyone when they see something that looks different than their own residence. So I appreciate the history lesson. I do believe it is important, John, in terms of, and relevant to the application that we have in front of us today. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Danko.
Thank you. 3 questions for you, Mr. Ahrens. First, when you started off your presentation, you mentioned that this property owner and others in the area are looking at private transit to get people to the GO station. Did I hear that correctly?
Through the chair, Mr. DeSantis and Mr. Pakin have had several meetings to discuss getting to the GO station in advance of public transit, and they are considering, car share, having stations within one of the developments, having a shuttle bus service that they themselves would operate, and of course Uber and bike and bike storage is built into the project. So those are the 3 options being considered, yes.
And the reason for that is because public transit in this area is not accessible to people, or it doesn't provide the service that would be required for this level of density currently?
Again, sir, transit follows development. So while the development is ongoing, it has to reach a certain critical mass before your HSR folks will say, okay, now we're putting a bus in. And until that happens, the triplets won't happen overnight. They'll be phased. This building will be phased. As an interim solution, if the 2 developers can work privately to get people to a GO station, that's a marketing feature. That may be the trigger for someone to say, yeah, I want a unit in this building.
have a different interpretation of that, but. Other question on the building standard that this is going to be built to. Is this minimum building code, or is the plan to do anything above and beyond?
So through the chair, Mr. DeSantis is one of the leading edge builder developers. They have a solid 55-year reputation. They build Energy Star requirements. They use, very efficient appliances, windows, everything. So it is a very high standard. Just like their Como project, it sells very quickly. All the development at Casablanca and Grimsby, where there is that Tim Hortons, have all sold very quickly. In fact, the Aqua Blue won Best Mid-Rise in all of Canada. It's a standard of quality that he definitely brings, and you can tell by the architecture. It's unique.
So it'll be built to net zero or passive house standard, something high efficiency building?
Yes, sir, I believe it will be.
And is there any affordable housing units incorporated into this?
So through the chair, the affordability will come with the unit sizes ranging from 500, 550, 600 square feet and up. So keeping the units small will result in more affordable housing.
And last question on the financing. So you mentioned that there's an issue with the holding provisions with financing, but at the same time you said, and you just mentioned, that people are basically knocking down the door in order to purchase these units. So I'm a little confused how there can be a financing issue if we can sell these right away with no problems.
So through the chair, the bank generally reviews and monitors what goes on in the development process. And they're aware that this project is coming. Mr. DeSantis has had those meetings with his bankers. And the bankers are saying, you get your zoning, we'll finance it, you can start your marketing. Mr. DeSantis, of course, has started his marketing. They've got a website, they're starting to get reservations. They've got thousands of people on their waiting list ready to go. Those people haven't signed offers to purchase yet because we're not at that phase, but it's typically bank financing, marketing, site plan approval. So it's the bank financing that comes first, and according to the bank managers, a holding zone is less desirable and causes them to have some second thoughts.
Thank you. Those are all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few questions. John, thank you for the presentation.
You're
There was
welcome.
one slide there, and I just want to verify what is proposed at the top of the building. I think it's the other rendition. Well, this could, actually, that one could show it. What's proposed on the very top level? I'm just seeing in the middle, it looks like it's all one. Is that actually 2 floors? Is that the recreational amenity space?
So through the chair, yes, there will be rooftop amenity space, there will be party rooms, media rooms, and the like, dispersed throughout the building as well. Okay. But definitely the panoramic views of the lake are an important component.
And you'll be working with staff with regards to noise issues on the rooftop amenity area?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you for that. You mentioned the loading zone, perfect slides right beside this. So where are you anticipating the loading zone to be?
Where the cursor is through the chair,
Thank you.
in this area here is identified as a loading zone.
Okay, but they'll still come in the one driveway only? Come in, load, and unload, correct?
That's correct. Through the chair, the driveway entrance here, the north wing is to the underground. This wing is to this parking area, both underneath the building and to the MTO spaces. And the truck will be able to come in here, back up, and then unload. And it's infrequent. It's only when people are moving. So,
Right. But how about for the commercial use?
So the commercial use would also use that space, and then they'd have to trolley and walk their materials in.
Okay.
Sorry, if I can add through the chair, we are proposing or suggesting some lay-by parking along Green Road, again, for the convenience of the commercial use.
Okay, thank you for that, and I'll certainly watch for that in the site plan, at the site plan stage, because that's, I'm sure, where it'll be incorporated. Just a couple of clarifications. So number one, Francis Avenue, and you can clarify. Francis Avenue is an arterial road, and it's been built to arterial standard, correct?
Through the chair, it's my understanding it's like a neighborhood collector type arterial, yes.
Thank you. And the bike trail, I know you mentioned it's on the North Service Road, not trying to correct you, but the bike path and the recognition of our biking system is on Francis to basically Millen, and Millen it goes out to the Service Road. So just going to be sure that that would be reflected as well. And lastly, on the H zoning, I'm glad to hear that you're okay with that staying in. I'd certainly be more than happy to work with staff and see that we can get this resolved. Because it is questionable, because the services were all put under they were all under the road, Mr. Chairman, back in the 70s. As a matter of fact, when the QEW was improved in 94, our staff did some additional underground works under the QEW to address capacity issues. I think it was further easterly for the Winona area. So appreciate that, but I also appreciate that Mr. DeSantis is okay with continuing to work with staff, but we'll work at getting that holding zone removed sooner than later.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, John.
Thank you. And Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, John. Just 2 points, if you could clarify for me. On the environmental efficiency of the building, you said Mr. DeSantis is thinking about it. Could you clarify, and when will he be solidifying his thinking? I think it's important given our commitments as a city.
So I see Serena Carboni from DeSantis is putting her hand up. Can I ask her to come to the podium and answer that? Yeah. They have more, direct experience through the chair with the actual building design than.
Who is this, Carboni?
This is Serena Carboni.
Yeah.
She is the marketing manager for Homes by DeSantis. So Serena.
Did you catch the question, Serena?
I did catch it. I was actually listening very intently when we were discussing it, because there are a number of features in this building that are going to be incorporated, such as geothermal. Heating and cooling will be incorporated into the building. We're looking at green roofs in some of the areas. You can actually see on that plan there, in order to assist with the separation from the rear townhouses, there's some green roofs planned. So there are a number of features that are going to be incorporated into this building, and that's in addition to the already high standards that we're building to in terms of our windows and the fenestration that's going to be proposed and the quality of the windows, the heating, the cooling systems, the green roof systems, and then energy monitoring through sub-metering of electricity and water to ensure that people are responsible for their own usage, as opposed to bulking that into a general condo fee where people tend not to pay as much attention if the toilet is running or anything else like that. So there are a number of green features. We're actually kind of coining, it's where green meets blue. So Green Road, the water, works out real well.
True marketing. Councillor Wilson?
Okay.
Sorry, would you mind, I don't mean to nitpick, but you used the phrase "you're looking at" and "you're doing," and I just want to know.
So the geothermal agreements are in the process of being prepared and signed right now. So it's happening. It's going in. It's going to occur.
Yeah, and how do you define a green roof?
Pardon?
How do you define a green roof?
A green roof, so plantings on the area. So basically there's a specific substrate system that's used and plantings are used. There's a buffer area there that works out really well. That particular system is still under investigation because we have to ensure that there's no negative impacts to the actual structure or anything requiring it, but that's in investigation right now.
Okay, thank you. And I had an additional question. When you were asked a question about who gets to live here, John, you referenced that the size, thank you, the size will determine the cost. And since you're probably already trying to obtain financing, can you speak a little bit to who you're marketing to and what those cost ranges are going to be?
So through the chair, the 500, 550, 600 square foot, one bedroom type units will be empty nesters, will be young professionals, people starting out their housing purchases. Price ranges, again, I'd have to defer to Serena. Can you give us an idea as to the prices?
Starting at $325.
So starting at $325.
I couldn't afford to get into the market at $325 when I was starting, but
Wow.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. It's the bank of mom and dad.
Councillor Clark. And then if you keep your mic on, I'm jumping in.
No problem. My questions are for staff. Go ahead and jump in.
Excellent, thank you. John, through you then. Chair is now over to our first vice. Have you had discussions with staff, and are you comfortable, should we approve what's here today and putting to bed the holding provisions between now and council?
So through the chair, I'm comfortable having those discussions and continuing to have those discussions. I'm hopeful that there's a resolution, and if not, then we have the H.
So you alluded to it, I think you downright said it. I'm having trouble trying to recall those types of holding provisions falling outside of a site plan process. So in your expertise and generally speaking, how often do we see holding provisions such as these outside a site plan and attached to an approval?
So the transportation one is unique.
Yeah.
Because it's, the staff accepting a study and agreeing with those conclusions. The sanitary one that's a legitimate holding provision. Like if you don't have capacity in the pipes, the land use requires an H. The lifting of the 1 foot reserve from the MTO, that's purely an administrative matter. That's typically, I can do that through my land use permits. So of the three, certainly the sanitary one is a concern. The other two, lesser concerns and should be delegated to site plan.
Okay, thank you. I will take the chair back. Your mic's still active, Councillor Clark, because you were next. Oh, you're going to staff, so do you have a question of the presenter? Councillor Danko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just going back to the building standard, I'm going to take a page out of Councillor Ferguson's playbook here. Through you, Mr. Chair, to John, it sounds like your client is already going this way. They're already committed to a high-performance building. So as a condition of approval, would your client have any problem with specifically putting in that they will build to a net zero passive house or other comparable high-performance building standard?
So through the chair, I'd have to defer to my client whether or not that would be part of an H.
Yes.
It doesn't look like that they're willing to shout out a decision like that right now. They're both sort of...
I can add...
It sounded like they're already committed to that, so why not make it official?
I defer to them, and if they're shaking their heads, then...
Would they like to answer?
That would
You're
be their
welcome
answer.
to come down to answer.
I can add that that's not a typical holding zone requirement either, the type of building standards, because we would need site plan approval to get to the building permit stage for you to sign off, and typically you sign off the H long before that.
They're shaking their head no. Sorry, councillors.
We've done similar for retirement home in Ancaster. We've required a shuttle for that, so I don't see this as anything different than something like that. It seems like they're already committed to, so I'm not sure why they wouldn't officially want to make that. And they're asking for double the density and height that the C5 zoning is asking for. So it seems reasonable to me that put it in writing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Move to receive. Thank you, Mr. Aarons. Moved by Ward Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Collins. All in favor? And Councillor Clark, based on Mr. Aarons' delegation, would you like to ask some questions of staff at this time?
Just with regards to the holding provisions, because I'm a little bit nervous about removing holding provisions because the developer is concerned about finance. So are these standard holding provisions that I see in this? They didn't jump out to me as being egregious.
Anita?
Through the chair to the councillor, the requirement for studies is certainly not uncommon. That is, under the official plan, we have the authority to put a holding on a property when we require a study. So they're outlined on page 2 of 40. As we've discussed, there are 3. So the first one relates to necessary upgrades to the sanitary sewers. So that speaks to actual physical upgrades. The second one relates to a TIS. So we hit traffic impact study. We have received drafts, but the requirement for the holding is that an updated study be submitted, approved, and then implemented. So whatever requirements or whatever whatever's been identified as the study, as through the studies needed to be implemented, that would be completed through the holding. And then the final one speaks to acquiring additional lands for access. So along Green Road, as you can see on the concept plan, they have an access driveway going onto Green Road. Those lands are owned by MTO. So through the circulation, MTO identified that they would be willing to work with the developer on acquiring, or they would dispose of these lands, the applicant would acquire them. We've placed a holding on the zoning for that to happen. We don't have the authority under the site plan process under the Planning Act to require merging of lands and acquisition, so this would be the appropriate time to do that.
And we have no authority over the MTO in terms of forcing them to disperse of the land accordingly.
Through the chair to the councillor, that's correct. MTO has indicated that they are agreeable to working with the owner to have those conversations and to work on the disposal / acquisition.
And, Mr. Chairman, has the MTO indicated a timeline? I'm suspecting no, but I thought I'd ask.
Through the chair to the councillor, not that I'm aware of. They just indicated that they have no concerns related to a transfer.
And finally, to anyone on the front bench, has this come up before where the banks are refusing to finance because of holding provisions? It seems unusual to me.
Director Robichaud, you look like you want to take a crack at that.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, this is the first I've encountered this situation where that people have asked not to have a holding provision as it relates to their ability to finance it. It's very clear as to what the holding provisions are. They're not just being arbitrarily imposed, so that it would be the onus would be then be on the applicant to demonstrate to the bank how they have to satisfy those conditions. It would be no different than draft plan approval. It raises the value of a property, and then you can refinance it on the basis of those terms and conditions. So they will have the certainty that the zoning will be in place. It's just that they have to do the necessary infrastructure upgrades and enter into an agreement with the city for those infrastructure upgrades. The onus will be on the applicant to satisfy the bank as to what they anticipate would be the order of magnitude of those costs relating to those matters.
And supplementary, if I may, Mr. Chairman, should we acquiesce to this request? How do we ensure that the studies are completed, the property is purchased without a holding provision?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, at the site plan stage, Mr. Sergi would rely on the adequacy of services provision in terms of being able to whether or not to sign off on the site plan, but there would be a risk there in terms of what that would be. In terms as it relates to the transportation issues, again, it would be whether or not Mr. Hollingworth's group would be prepared to approve the site plan subject to them completing the works. The zoning bylaw, the way it's being structured, it contemplates land assembly occurring. So if they don't assemble the land, it could cause issues. I think as Ms. Fayback indicated, MTO controls the lands over which they access, but it does create some operational difficulties from our perspective because we end up having to renegotiate those terms and the conditions. I think it would be easier if we were just to be very clear that the city's approving it with these holding provisions in place. It provides a lot more certainty and understanding for everyone on a go-forward basis because they know exactly what the city's obligations, requirements are prior to development proceeding.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I can't support eliminating those holding provisions. Sorry.
Great. Members of the public now wishing to speak on the issue. We did have one indicate earlier. You can come on down. Your time has come. We'll ask you to state your name and rough address prior to speaking. And after you're through, sir, if you could clearly write your name and address and telephone number in the book provided, it'll be to your left between you and Councillor Clark there. So you can start right away. Oh, you have a presentation?
Yes, good morning. My name is Frank Josephack. I'm a resident of 301 Francis Avenue, Ward 10. I did submit a letter to the group. It's one of the 17, but I also have some talking points that I'd like to go over. And
Well,
hopefully we can have some discussion.
Appreciate you coming today.
And how do I advance? Okay. All right. Sorry? Oh, here? Sorry, this is all new to me. All right, so obviously we're all here for 461 Green Road. The bid to have 461 Green Road classified as C5, in my opinion, needs to be rejected. And in large part because of the zoning designation of C5. It is not a C5 designation. We've heard from a number of people, the gentleman from IBI, Mr. Vrooman, it seems like we're trying to shoehorn a proposal into a designated existing commercial designation. So this application fails to meet the criteria for C5 on every level. It requires 17 pages of site-specific modifications to meet the developer's needs. 17 pages of modifications to shoehorn it into a C5. Setting aside all the minutia, the two main reasons it must fail, are height and density, just as the gentleman from IBI. So out of that 17 pages, the crux of it is height and density. Again, you're all familiar with this, but just quickly. Height is proposed at 14 stories. The maximum allowed technically is 6, but it can go to 8. Density is pegged at 349 units per hectare. There's no max density for C5 because it's not intended for this type of thing. It's a commercial zoning. It's not what we have in front of us here is a residential project with a very small commercial aspect. You're probably going to have 18 to 20,000 meters of residential and 465 meters of commercial. So in my mind, that's not a commercial enterprise. UHOP E4.6 describes density at a moderate scale. So commercially, you can have residential, but at a moderate scale. But even if we took the high density residential values, it would be 200 UPH. When we talk about high density, we have to put a number to it. Today it's 200. Back when this original Green Road project started, RM5 was high density, but 150 units per hectare. Am I correct, Ms. Pearson?
Well, we'll wait. You
Okay.
finish up and then.
Anyways, if you look at the Stony Creek 3692, RM5 is 150 units per hectare. And what they're asking for here is 349 units per hectare. So it's not good enough just to say high density. You got to put a number to it. All right, I think we covered that. So UHOP talks about medium density designation for the C5 in E4.6. It's difficult to see 461 Green Road meet the criteria for E4.6 in terms of function, scale, and design. Here are some obvious discrepancies. 4.6, we're using medium density designation. Medium density designation is to permit a full range of retail service, commercial, entertainment, and residential accommodation at a moderate scale. So it's designed for commercial with a moderate scale of residential. And here we've got that reversed. 4.67, lands designated mixed use medium density shall contain a range of buildings, heights, and densities to a maximum height of 6 stories, which you're all aware of. And then the rest is redundant. I mean, you're very aware of that. And again, it can go to 8. 4.68, it can go to 8. There's only one other comp that I could find that's a C5 in the Stony Creek area, and that's Casa de Tora at 121 Highway 8. And it's zoned C5. It's close to the same size property. It's almost 7,000 square meters, whereas there's 774 and change. It's at 8 stories with a 220 UPH. So it almost fits the C5 category, and it's slightly above the high-density designation, but it's reasonable. I mean, what the 461 Green Road is looking for double the C5 height, and again, and almost double the density. There's been some talk, I'm sorry, Mr. Collins left, he was talking about historical. So this is 301 Francis Avenue. It's designated RM5. It's 18 stories tall. But if you'll notice, look at the side yards, the front yards, the back yards. It sits on 35% of the property, and that's part of RM5 designation. The plate size can be 35% of the property. Here you see 301 and 500 together. They're both 18 stories. Now the thing is, both of them are under 150 UPH, both of them. 301 Francis is 147.7, and 500 Green Road is 147 even. So when the discussion about high density, we throw that around, but you've got to put the number to it. These buildings are only at 150 density. They're not 350 density. And that's the crux of, what we're talking about. Height isn't the issue, it's the density. You're cramming in 349 units in a hectare versus what a high density number was of 150. So Hamilton's always talking about a lot of intensification. Excuse me. There's a lot of work going on in Stony Creek right now. There's a lot of different projects. There's the Kings Park project, there's the Casa de Tora 560 Grace, the DeSantis project, the Kokomo, and the LJM Tower. So there's quite a few properties that are in the works. Most of these, the shovel's not even in the ground. The Kokomo has the townhouses and the masonettes, but not the condo yet. But there's a lot of upcoming units. So there's no need to go crazy and, give 349 units per hectare for one property when it's being spread out throughout the entire city. And in the Green, the Millen Road development itself, you can see there's been quite a bit of activity. We have the old buildings, 263 units and 158. And the townhouses in the It's not so much that the city's actually encouraged developers to have mixed usage. If we can go back to these pictures, you can see the 125 waterfront, it's a 4-story condo. There's all kinds of townhouses around there. There's the Sapphire, I think it's 6 stories. So it's a good mix. It's a very pleasant area to live in. And when you look at these properties here, the towers as we call them, they're set back from the road. They have large side yards, large backyards, and they're not intrusive. It's like part of the neighborhood. And again, I have to stress, they only utilize 35% of the property, which is part of the RM5 code. And that's what makes them fit in. You'll notice these are pictures in the wintertime, but they're green, they're easy to walk by, and they're, it becomes part of the neighborhood. So in conclusion, densities have been on the rise over the last few years. They seem to be going up and up and up. The code says high density residential is 200, but we're talking about 300, 350, even 400, which is it's crazy. I mean, why do we have codes when we're just throwing these big numbers out? So I'm saying just as police officers are obligated to uphold the laws of the land, the planning committee is obligated to represent their constituents and uphold the bylaws of the city of Hamilton by rejecting this amendment. So my objection is more to the fact that they're trying to zone it a commercial rather than a residential. My thoughts are obviously there's going to be a building there, and there's going to be a residence there, but it should be zoned a high-density residential and comply within those parameters. And it seems that on a commercial designation, their setbacks are less. It's the property, the percentage of the property is more. So they're trying to get 260 units in an area that should have about 150.
Thank you, Frank.
And as part of the discussion, Mr. Collins, you weren't here, but we were talking about high density and the definition of high density. So that definition of high density it was 150, now it's 200. So we shouldn't be talking about 349. That's ultra high density. And to Mr. Danko's point that he made, this is a dangerous precedent you're going to be setting. C5 at 14 stories, when they go to build properties on Upper James and throughout the city, that's the new standard. It's going to be 14 stories. And to one of the other councilors' discussions about transportation and access to the GO station, there's no way to get to the GO station right now. I live there. You have to drive to the GO station. It's almost 4 kilometers. You can't walk on the service road. And even on Francis, the sidewalks stop partially down the road. So I just think you need to have the proper zoning and the proper, and within the parameters of that zone. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Frank. Stay there. Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Frank, for coming out and the presentation you made. You did an awful lot of work there. I appreciate it, and I will ask staff for clarification on the zoning. But I just want to ask, you mentioned, police have to follow the law and make sure the law is enforced, and certainly our bylaws are in place for that reason. But of all the lists of developments that you put up there, they were all applications for amendments to zoning bylaw. You're aware of that? So not one has come in that was not a request to planning committee for a rezoning of the land to the zoning that's allowed in that area.
Well, zoning has changed. With the amalgamation, it's complicated it to the nth degree. I mean, you look at the LJM project on Barton Street at Bell Manor. It's got a really bizarre code. And it appears to be a commercial project. It's all commercial on the ground floor, and it's got 12 floors of residential above it. But it's not a commercial designation. So, I mean, it's I have to shake my head when I look at a lot of the zoning.
I appreciate that. I just want to clarify that all of the applications that you showed up there, all of the developments have pretty well all been
But this doesn't
applications
fit into the
so.
C5.
And I will ask staff to clarify that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Councillor Clark, can you indicate, I just have one quick question for Frank, since he came all this way.
Go ahead, sir.
Thanks again for delegating and preparing the presentation, Frank. The planner prior to you up here, John Ahrens, representing the developer, talked about urban design to enhance compatibility, and he showed us a lot of, I think, very nice pictures. Those buildings would fit down here in my ward, in the heart of the city. But you see this.
But again, in the city, the downtown, that would be perfect because look how close it is to the sidewalk. It's right on the service road, right on the sidewalk, straight up on those two faces.
Frank, can I ask?
If you look at Mr. Vroom's.
Excuse me, gentlemen. Frank, if you can let him finish asking the question and then answer, please.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I don't blame him for jumping in there. I set myself up, so good catch there, Frank. Through you, Chair. To Frank, I want to focus on the west-facing and the north-facing. So where we see those step backs that address privacy to a great extent, maybe not fully, the sun shadow, all those things we hear about when taller buildings are proposed next to single-family residential. Does that urban design to enhance compatibility effort at all work for you in any way? Or is it your preference to say, okay, 8 stories, maximum height of what may be permitted now, but a straight up square or rectangle structure?
No, by no means. When you look at the at their renderings, they look very attractive. When you look at Mr. Vroom's, when he imposed it on the property like that, it looks horrendous. It looks like a big block that's dropped in there. So renderings look good. I mean, you have to put it in context.
Right, and that's the context I'm kind of going at right now. Yes, it's 5 to 6 greater than what you would prefer. Because height and density were your issue, hold on, and I'll go through the chair and then you can come back at me. But the urban design of the rendering, I think, is more significant in that, you know, that would be, if approved here, set into stone, and they would need to, you know, they would have to develop according to that design, and that design is not only for the privacy and the sun shadow and all of those things that can be, you know, unattractive, especially to the adjacent landowners, but also the compatibility of the neighborhood, and that's really an important factor that maybe even 5-7 years ago we didn't pay enough attention to as city planners or planning committee. So through you, Chair, just your thoughts on that,
Frank, go ahead.
and whatever you wanted to say there that I interrupted.
That's all well and said, but it's not commercial. It's not a C5 zone. I mean, if they want to build a residential, I don't want to call it a tower, but a residential complex, go through the residential zoning and comply with those standards and rules. Don't take a C5 and have 17 pages of modifications and try to shoehorn this thing into a commercial, when it's not. I mean, it's like 3 or 4% commercial and 96% residential. I mean, it's a dangerous precedent for the city to be setting.
And through you, Chair, I thought I had heard, maybe you know more as a local resident, the whole reason for it being commercial in the first place is just to give it that identity when the strip mall was put in place years back. So it's like I have a parkland dedicated zoning, a P1 at the corner of James and Strawn. Well, we only called it a P1 so Public Works wouldn't forget to go and cut the grass until such time as it went back to what it was supposed to be. So through you, in the history of you living in the neighborhood, was the C5 not put in place just to recognize the strip mall?
Frank? Well, as said by the gentleman from IBI, DeSantis is struggling with the commercial aspect.
And the Dennis move.
They're really, I mean, there is no real demand for it. I mean, you look at what's going on at 50 Road. It's huge. I mean, everybody goes to 50 Road shopping now. You've got Centennial, you got 50 Road, you got, I mean, there's really no huge demand for commercial. And it's a token commercial to get a commercial zoning. I don't think, if they could get rid of that commercial, I'm sure they would. But.
Councillor?
Good, thank you, thank you. I'll take the chair back. And no further speakers. Move to receive the delegation. Moved by Pearson, seconded by Clark. All in favor? That is carried. Any additional members of the public wishing to speak? Going once, and we do have a gentleman. Just come right up to the podium and begin with your name and roughly where you're from, and then after you're through, and Frank, did you sign the book? Get at it afterwards, okay? Just thank you.
Good morning, Chairs. My name is Sayantan Radhakrishnan, and I live in 124 Francis Avenue. You're talking about traffic. We are living in the Francis Avenue, and always summer bicycles. It's going through Burlington, through Niagara, so no bike lanes over there, and speed limit is 50, children's playing. So if we have a building comes and all 349 units, or 260 units, so how many parents and kids going to be in that building and go to school? And school issue is bus, we don't have a school same side, so we need to cross over to Grace, to the Barton Street for the schools. So only one bus comes there for the public school, elementary school, and stays in the Teal and Francis, in the corner of it. That's always stopped. So there is a safety issue there. So no parking over there, safety issues there, no sidewalks afterwards, and all the trucks goes through the Grace Road to Barton. No access over there to highway. So all goes to the straight. So a lot of issues over there. And if any accident happen, all goes to North Service Road, divert to Francis, and then goes through that. And IBA gentleman said, oh, we block it. So if they block the road and how everybody goes. So if it's stuck, highway stuck, then we have to get out just to the North Service Road takes half an hour. Even not to get into the highway, to the Queen Elizabeth. So you don't have any back roads over there. We are isolated, just jam up over there. So he said about 116 going back and forth every morning. So even North Service Road, councillor said that they put the signal and they put 60, but you know how many people they bypassing and going over speed on 80 or 90. Do they have any regulations over there? Even you put even the 50 on the Francis, no bumpers. No, we requested to change to 40 a couple of years ago, and they put the sign to 50. And a lot of kids, a lot of young generation moving over there. Though he said about $325,000 for the professionals to move in, not affordable. Even there's price for the pay for the tuition fees and everything after you become a doctor or anything, so you cannot pay for it. So that's not right. And then he mentioned about the dentist moved out because of no business. There is a business, but everybody left because they removed to monthly basis lease. Because dentists, I know my friend coming from Hamilton to the dentist. So I went to the dentist to the same place. Right now I need to cross over to go to anywhere to get in the dentist. So that's the thing. Main thing is that in the Francis Road traffic, it's going to be no sidewalks there, pass by, and so accident. Grace Road also no sidewalks. No, everybody said, okay, great to go to the lake, great to go to the Confederation Park by walk or bike, then nothing. There is a safety problem because everybody walk with the dogs and bikes goes like a parallel, and safety issues going to raise a lot. Thank you.
I appreciate you coming in. Thank you very much. Don't forget to sign that book. Sure. And if you wouldn't mind, actually, not to worry. Move to receive the delegation. Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Clark. All in favor? Anybody else? Going once? Twice? 3 times? Motion to receive the delegation has been moved to receive the written submissions at this time. Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Partridge. And that carries. And a motion to close the public meeting, moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Collins. All in favor? One carries. And now on the motion, Councillor Pearson.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask the staff a question just to Mr. Jasvak's concern again with regards to the zoning that was used? Could I get staff's clarification why they went with this zoning, why there's so many variations or variances requested, and the density? And I know Tim did mention in his presentation, I mean, I know our densities say, 150 units per hectare, but there's also provincial legislation has changed as far as the 40% intensification. So maybe Mr. Vrooman can clarify this, or Anita, I would appreciate it.
Sure,
Through
we
you,
could have
sir.
Tim or Anita do that. And Lisa, would you mind bringing the sign-in book up to Frank there? I forgot to make sure he signed it. Thanks. Anita.
Through the chair to the councillor. So these lands are currently in zoning bylaw 05200. As planning committee is well aware, we don't have residential zones for 05200.
Right.
And it's not our practice to take lands out of 05200, put them in the old zoning bylaw, only to have to bring them back into 05200 at some point in the future. So as Mr. Vrooman indicated during his presentation, we took the zoning that we could was sort of the best fit of the zones that we have. I mean, we do have the TOC zones, which or the transit oriented corridor zoning, but those zones wouldn't or couldn't be applied to this property in particular because it wouldn't meet the characteristics or the criteria of the TOC zones. So we used the C5 zone and then modified it to implement this proposal. So there are a number of variances. Mr. Vrooman indicated during his presentation that these are required to implement the proposal as it is. So there's variances related to step backs. There are variances related to parking. So that's generally why we use the C5 zoning. As I said, it was the zone that's within 05200 that best fits the proposal. And then there was a question about density. So the neighborhoods, which this property is designated, does allow up to 200 units per hectare. Councillor Pearson is correct. There are intensification targets from the province. There's also policies within the UHOP that we use when we evaluate proposals for intensification. So there's certain criteria or certain situations we want to make sure that we're protecting. We want to make sure there's no sun shadow impacts. We look at the location of the property. So those are the things that we consider when we look at intensification.
Thank you, and I appreciate that clarification, and hopefully for the viewing public and the speaker, Mr. Jasvak, that it's given some clarification. And the reason we don't have residential in the 05200 is we haven't gotten there yet. Is that correct through you, Mr. Chairman?
Through the chair to the councillor, that's correct. Staff are currently working on the residential zones for 05200.
And it can't come fast enough. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Clark.
I agree on that for sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 39 of 40, we're dealing with the holding provisions. At the very bottom of the page, there's a paragraph, and I'm going to read it. It says, a traffic impact study was submitted with the application and needs to be revised to address some inconsistencies. However, the concerns do not question the available capacity of the transportation network. Can someone translate that into layman's language? What are we saying there?
Yeah, so through the chair, as mentioned, we have received, I believe it's the third iteration of the traffic study. It was largely issues related to us not being able to extract the right information from the traffic study, things like queue lanes and stuff like that. So we're now more or less comfortable that the methodology is correct. So we're recommending this holding provision so that we do still have control of some traffic issues such as access to the driveway, the lay-by parking on Green Road, which was proposed, we're not so much in favor of. So from an overall network perspective, as was shown in Mr. Arian's slide, Green Road and North Service Road is projected to operate at level service C, which is generally acceptable.
So help me out, Mr. Chairman. The last part of the sentence says the concerns do not question the available capacity of the transportation network. So are you saying there are no issues with the capacity of the transportation network, or there are issues that have not been addressed in the study?
For this site, for clarity, the network has the capacity to handle the traffic from this site.
For the site. So we're not talking about the comprehensive nature of everything else, just this one site, correct?
This site in combination with the background developments that were included in that traffic study.
That exists currently?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Councillor Collins.
Thanks. I don't want to lose sight, Mr. Chairman, of some of the issues that were raised today as it relates to pedestrian safety, and there are some linkages there that I think we need to improve on, and specifically Francis, and I know Councillor Pearson, whether it's been, excuse me, the light that was referenced earlier, excuse me, or some of the other improvements that have been made in the neighborhood earlier in previous years, I would certainly support some direction to staff in terms of, at the very least, continuing on the sidewalk that's on Francis, and I think it's almost from the pond where it ends to Grays to get people to the park, as the gentleman mentioned earlier. So if we know that there are more vehicles and there are more people going to be living in this area, including the towers that will come in the future, I'd be interested in supporting Councillor Pearson with those connections. And so I know this is a planning committee meeting, and this is outside of the application process, but I think because those concerns have been raised today and in the past, I'm supportive of whatever initiative might come as it relates to at least completing that one sidewalk there to make a safe connection to Grays Road. And so I'll leave it in Councillor Pearson's hand in terms of how we accomplish it, but I think it's relevant to today's application that we have in front of us, and I'd be willing to support that initiative to allay some of the concerns that some of those people have raised, past and present.
Second time, Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and if, with all due respect, I appreciate the previous councillor's concerns and absolutely agree. So we do have development proposal that is coming forward on the southwest side of Francis at Grays that will see the incorporation of sidewalks and that. I'm working with the developer potentially for the east side, so that's coming along. But first and foremost, I have been working with cycling, I'm trying to remember his name now, Daryl Bender, with regards to the markings of a cycling path along Francis, so it does recognize, because it's in our cycling map, that is the recognized cycling route through there. And I have been working with him to incorporate a cycling marking through and potentially sidewalks. So that's been in his hands, and I will be continuing to follow up to see where that's going. I absolutely agree. And we can see where that, how we can get that addressed in the future. And Councillor Collins is well aware that back, I think it was 2010, 2012, in that period, we did have the north side of Francis from Grays Road to just about the 6 townhouses were built, just about the pond, paved, so that it made it a safer area for cycling and walking. But continuing to work on it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Danko.
Just a couple wrap-up comments. Is that appropriate this time?
Well, if you want to wait till the motion gets on the floor, and
Let's do
if you
that.
want to comment instead of, I think we've pretty much exhausted any clarity questions, and you want to move it, Councillor Pearson, and then you can go first, Councillor Danko. And seconded by Councillor Collins, and it is on the floor, so go ahead and indicate again. Anything you want now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a few quick wrap-up comments on this discussion. This is a really interesting one because I can definitely see where the developer's going with this, their desire for the density in that area. I get the historic context, but I got 3 kind of concerns that stand out. So the first is just the consistency with our C5 zoning. Again, going back to anywhere in Upper James, we have very similar major arterial backing onto residential. And just looking at the shadow impacts that were presented, I mean, that alone would negate going to 8 stories. So having that double the height, double the density in a very similar situation is concerning. The second is some of the points that were brought up about the development charges and who pays for what, and the question of what improvements are going to be needed in that area with increased density. And my understanding was that, through Councillor Clark's questioning, is that those improvements were not part of the DC background study. So essentially, the developer would be paying less DCs than they would be if they were included. So that's a concern that essentially the taxpayer would be subsidizing this development to a certain extent through a reduction in DCs. And then the third is just the overall scale and scope of the development, double the density, double the height. And the question then is, okay, well, what is the public good of acquiescing to that? And I mean, they're offered a, one thing that they said they were doing anyway, but then didn't want to officially agree to that. So, I mean, and on the affordable housing side as well, that, if we're going to work that hard to fit a development like this into a property such as this, then there should be more public good that's coming out of it, and I don't see that with this application. And the final thing is the holding provisions. So I absolutely don't support the removal of any holding provisions. I mean that should just be fundamental. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are all my comments, and that's it.
Okay, the motion is before us, moved by Pearson, seconded by Councillor Collins. All in favor? And it carries. And I need a motion regarding the staff reports. The submissions received did not affect the decision. That is moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Collins. All in favor? And now a motion on the main motion as amended. Moved by Pearson, seconded by Collins. How's that, Lisa? Good. On to, yep, Councillor Clark.
So can I just ask, perhaps Mr. Sergi can get back to us with regards to the broader property in that whole area and the issue that it wasn't captured in the DC background study. Can we just, at some future date, get some information on that in terms of how we're going to be trying to deal with that issue? Please. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Sergi will take that as direction. Discussion items, item 10.1. I've got myself on the list. I should have kept your mic on 10.1. Councillor Clark, if you wouldn't mind, thank you. And very quickly, I wanted to thank, this was a motion I moved after a Ward 1 delegate whose home is now, I believe, designated, came to the rightful place, the Planning Committee, in protest, sharing with us that he had heard through a realtor that a designation of heritage to his home was going to cost him. It was going to devalue his home, and his property value would decrease. And from that, we moved a motion that's in the three-page report before us, that the appropriate staff be requested to consult with the Realtors Association of Hamilton Burlington in an effort to determine if they are aware or possess any documented proof that this is the case. And it wasn't just this one delegate. In the past, I think we've heard Councillor Whitehead as a committee member publicly say that it's an issue on property values. I say I think, and I wish Councillor Whitehead was here to argue with me. I can't believe I just said that for the record, but I wish he was. Regardless, I have myself in this ward, we've designated close to about 1,800 properties, almost 1,000 when we did the downtown heritage registry, and we did have two appellants, 1,000 properties, two appellants. One was rectified over time with the conversations that Councillor Ferguson assisted in. The other, I'm not sure where it landed, but was also very insistent over by Hunter Street, as I recall, that if we were to put the properties that she had owned on the registry, she had heard through real estate agents that was going to decrease her property values. So we finally put that to bed after all these years, thanks to the good work of our staff, and in this case, David Addington. Thank you, David, very much. After all these years. And David alludes in this report to studies that he looked at from 2000, 2001, and 2005 that pretty much indicate there is no negative effect on resale values. And in fact, in some cases, you slap a designation on a beautiful old building and the property value rates increase in some cases. The report indicates that these concerns are largely anecdotal and based on individual perceptions, not supporting data. I have just one question through you to David, and again, with great thanks, David. One thing the report indicates is we're going to continue to dialogue on this with the Hamilton Burlington Real Estate Association through you. What does that look like?
Addington, please.
Yeah, so we had a very productive meeting with the Realtors Association, and they were somewhat surprised that there was that information that heritage designation was negatively affecting property values. So what that looks like is potentially workshops to be held in their office for the agents. The perception may be that they are sort of, it's anecdotal. The agents may not know for sure exactly what the impact of designation or adding a property to the register may be. Additionally, we could probably help out with giving them some mapping so they know which properties are designated, which ones are on the inventory, which ones are registered.
Great.
So it feels like we can have a productive relationships where they can help us, potentially providing us with some data on average sales figures, and we can help them with workshops potentially to educate the real estate agents.
And what's great is you've got a nice, concise info report that folks like myself, members of our Hamilton Municipal Heritage Committee, I'm sure, will keep in our back pocket the next time someone comes along and says, well, a realtor told me my property will be devalued if you designate my building, which I think is really important. We can counter that and in fact show that in some cases your property values will go up. And perhaps now our realtors, and particularly through the association, thanks to the ongoing dialogue, will start marketing designated properties accordingly and positively. I'm sure they do in many cases, but there are obviously some still, realtors, I don't know how many, but there's a few out there that seem to think that it devalues property based on what delegates and I believe one councillor have shared in the past. Thank you very much. This is very helpful for me. It's long coming, and I know you're very busy. I had a million suggestions for you to keep the conversation going, but it sounds like you're doing enough, Dave. I'll take the chair back, Mr. Chair, and a member of our Heritage Committee, Councillor Partridge.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And David, thank you for this report. And I will say it just kind of proves, I think, what most of us have known. I know in my area, if there's a heritage building that comes up for sale, it does not stay on the market very long and usually goes for higher than asking. I also have real estate agents that I know of, not just in my area, but throughout the city, that actually live in heritage designated homes and have done a fabulous job. And yet I had a conversation just 6 months ago with a real estate agent who argued this point, and I said, what are you basing it on? And they said, well, everybody knows. And I said, well, what are you basing it on? What kind of studies have been done, you know? Well, no, everybody knows that. So I'm very encouraged to hear that there will be some education, because I think it is really important that real estate agents do reflect what the actual truth is about the properties that they're listing or that they're, speaking of in communities right across our city and outside of our boundaries. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think your recollections about the impetus of this discussion and some of the positions of other councillors was accurate. I've only experienced it a couple of times, and in both times I was struck that the condition of the building itself was likely more the culprit in terms of the lower evaluation than the actual heritage designation. But perhaps sometimes it's easier to blame the heritage designation in Big Bad City Hall than it is to say to the willing seller, your house is not up to the condition that would warrant a higher price. But I'm just speculating, much like the developer or the realtors have been speculating that it's the heritage that is lowering the value.
Move to receive, thank you. Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Partridge. All in favor. Next, business licensing bylaw 07-170, amendments to the adult entertainment schedule. Moved by Councillor Collins and seconded by Councillor Pearson. All in favor. Convoluted and with no comments. Next, it's the dedicated Mohawk College enforcement. A motion to approve the recommendations. Councillor Pearson first.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, thank you through you to staff are just coming in, I believe. We'll give them a chance.
Yep, Councillor James Buffett is the manager of enforcement. Played a big role at our last planning committee meeting, and I think he's ready.
Absolutely. Good morning. Good morning, James and Brian. Thank you for being here. So I just want to ask the question, because I'm assuming this report is this dealing with the Mohawk Fennel campus, or are we dealing with both campuses being the Salt Fleet, which is in Ward 10?
Through the chair, the intent of this project was for the Mohawk campus.
So all of this is to address their issues, okay? Because we do know that there are issues with the Salt Fleet campus that I continue to work with staff on. I was surprised to read, through you, Mr. Chairman, the college, their paid parking on-site rates. Do we know if this is the same rate that's being charged at Salt Fleet? And I only read the report over the weekend, so I haven't had a chance to follow up.
Through the chair, I'm unsure of what the rates are down at the location in Stony Creek, but I would imagine they're probably pretty similar.
Okay, because it was through my encouragement through the college a number of years ago, recognizing the issues with parking in the neighborhood, on the neighborhood streets, because the college at that time was charging only by semester. So it was a large rate, and Salt Fleet campus being a trades college per se, that you have tradespeople going in and upgrading their trades, so they may be there 3 weeks or 2 weeks. I know because my husband attended when he was at Stelco to get upgrades there, and they would be required to pay for a full semester in parking. So I did request, and they were amenable to allowing metered parking. So they do have metered parking by the hour, by the half day, by the day. And then by the week, whatever. So I'm not sure if their rates are the same, but they have tried to address that. So last question then, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask, I know I was just giving out information. James, what would it take to incorporate the Salt Fleet campus into the numbers on this report?
So through the chair, the staff recommendation is basically that, where we want to utilize this extra FTE for the next 12 months to maybe address parking concerns across the entire city. So implementing another FTE, we'd be able to shrink geographical kind of beat areas for our staff.
Right into the mic there, James.
Yes, thank you, James.
Apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Implementing this additional FTE on this 12 months temporary basis, we look at what feasibility we could have addressing concerns across all wards of the city, inclusive of that Mohawk Stony Creek campus as well.
Thank you, and I am supporting it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, James. Whatever can be done, and I know I work very closely with the staff on ongoing issues. So, thank you. Good report, and we'll support it.
Councillor Danko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to thank staff, James Buffett and of course Mary Collins, for their work on this and the very hard work that they do in the Mohawk College area. As I'm sure everybody's aware, parking in these areas that are adjacent to major institutions are a major challenge for residents who live in those areas. And just working through with those departments and trying to be as proactive that we can on enforcement so that there's a clear boundary between what's expected and what's not allowed. And having the enforcement there as a dedicated enforcement is just been tremendously helpful. We did run into an interesting thing through the summer where James came to our office and said, you know, during the summer months, it's not so needed to have that dedicated enforcement officer just specifically tied to the Mohawk area. So they requested that they be expanded to other areas of the city. So there was a motion, we approved that. And that's what we've tried to do here as well. In particular, item B, that the temporary parking enforcement officer can be used to supplement enforcement efforts throughout the city so that they're not just specifically tied to that Mohawk area. And I think that makes a lot of sense. It allows parking to better utilize this FTE to benefit those areas as a spot basis where they're needed, in particular in Councillor Vanderbeek's areas, for example, on long weekends where they can use this officer to supplement those areas and other areas of the city as Councillor Pearson mentioned. So obviously I'm very supportive of this and just wanted to thank staff for the very hard work that they've done in enforcing parking adjacent to Mohawk College. Thank you.
Okay. You want to move it?
I would love to move
Seconded by Councillor Pearson. All in favor? Collins conflict. Okay. Motions, temporary use of parking sites to accommodate construction at 18 to 25 King Street East in Hamilton. Councillor Farr, please present your motion. Councillor Clark, if you wouldn't mind, I'll throw it over to you.
Councillor Farr, would you like to present your motion?
I would. Thank you for asking. It's
Please
before
proceed.
us. it was a notice last meeting that staff temporarily defer any enforcement action against the temporary use of parking at 20 Jackson Street West and 28 James South for the purposes of accommodating displaced parking for the duration of the construction period of the aforementioned addresses, those famous Gore buildings. And that is all,
you.
and that is
If you
seconded by
could,
Councillor Collins.
Thank you. And if you could turn on Councillor Pearson's microphone, she'd like to ask questions or comment.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Acting Chair. So I have no problem with supporting the motion, and certainly it's good news that the Gore transition will be moving forward. My only concern, and maybe you can clarify, Councillor Farr, is the timeline and how will staff know? Because I just don't want it to be caught that there's a never-ending window. And I'm not sure how that will be addressed, whether there should be agreements or whatever. So I'm sure you've conversed with staff, or maybe staff can elaborate.
Mr. Thorne?
So through the chair, staff's anticipating that's for the duration of construction. Until we actually have the final building permits in place, we don't have a great sense of how long that time period will be. But we would expect that for the duration of construction, the existing parking areas will be unavailable. So we'd be interpreting the motion to be non-enforcement for that period of time. Once the construction hoarding is down and that parking is back available online, we would deem that to be the end point of this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson?
And we will have that in some agreements with the developer?
Mr. Thorne?
So through the chair, we wouldn't require it in an agreement. The property owners will require an agreement amongst themselves. We're not party to that. But from a non-enforcement standpoint, what we'd be looking at is not enforcing on the zoning issue around provision of commercial parking until such time as the commercial parking currently available behind the Gore buildings comes back online once the construction is completed.
Okay.
Councillor?
Thank you for that.
Really good question. I think you're looking out for us here, and that it doesn't continue as a use once the project is through. And if you don't mind, very quickly on that, because it's relevant.
Did you wish to speak, Councillor?
If you don't mind, I'll put myself back on the list just to address it very quickly. No shortage of folks that'll recognize cars are parking in an area where there's a moratorium or there's no parking. So we're going to hear it anyway from those in the public who are very much supportive, like I am, of this moratorium. In this case, the existing parking is being used, will be used for construction staging, and so the parking is going in these temporary locations. Once we cut the ribbon, James Buffett will be back with his yellow pieces of violation papers. So thank you. That was good. I know you were looking out for me. I will take the chair back now. I'm through.
No, you won't.
Oh, I don't until the motion.
I appreciate it. You can turn your microphone off, though. Thank you. Item 11.1 is before us. It was moved by Councillor Farr, seconded by Councillor Collins. Seeing no further questions or comments, the vote is a recorded vote. The item is carried. Councillor Farr, you can take the chair back, please.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate all your assistance today. General Manager Jason Thorne, do you have any updates for committee today? Oh, okay. It's just Gore alone is, we've got a few things to celebrate there, but that's fine. Thank you. Motion to receive that non-update. Don't need to do that. Thank you, Jay. And thank you to all your staff. I'm looking to adjourn now. Moved by Councillor Pearson and seconded by Councillor Clark. All in favor? Any opposed?